One of the things people often want to do is convert a measurement from inches to feet in inches. And so I'm going to try to show how you can set this up where it's really simple to use and it doesn't take much effort to get it all set up. And once you do, it's there for good. I've got just a rectangular polyline here, and this is a text box that just shows what I've got in the label. And I've just done this because this is pretty small for people to try to read. Oh, and there's this use default formatting. I've not even looked at the documentation on this, but if you uncheck that, you get this perimeter value. This is just the default formatting in inches and decimals. If you check that, you get things that are centered, and you get this in inches and fractions of an inch. So I'm going to show you how to get this changed from inches to feet in inches. And here's a couple of different formats and a couple of different ways that you can accomplish this. I'm using the number formatter. This is something that was new in X12. So if you are on an older version, this is not going to work. And I've done a topic over here in Tips and Techniques about using the number formatter. And I've got a video here and some files you can download if you want to get some more information on that. This was done back in May of 2020. And as far as I know, it's all still accurate. So that might be a good place to start. Chief comes with a tutorial. When you open up, this is the Ruby console. When you open this up, you've got this button down here that says tutorial. And if you click that, it brings up the beginnings of a tutorial. And I also have taken all this text and copied it off to just a regular text file for this tutorial. And if you look over here in Tips and Techniques and search around for Ruby tutorial or something like that, you'll find this text, so you don't have to navigate through this. You can just read it as a plain text file. But anyway, this tutorial is right here. And you can find that in Chief Architect Premiere X12, Resources, Scripts, tutorial.rb. And you can see here that the first line here is Welcome to Ruby and Chief Architect. If you look up here, I know you probably can't read this, but it says that right there, Welcome to Ruby and Chief Architect. And then it says you can use these keywords. And down here you can use these keywords. So all you're seeing in this text file is here. This is a Ruby file. It's got a .rb extension on it, and it's just a script. It's just a text file. It's not anything special. And it's in the scripts folder. So that's on my system, Chief Architect Premiere X12 Data, Scripts, and then Format RB. And this is something I've written, and I'll attach this to this post when I get finished. And it's going to create a new number formatter. I'm calling it FI for feet and inches. And the important thing here is that it needs to start with a capital letter. And that makes it a constant. And I'm not going to go into explaining what or why. Just know that it needs to start with a capital letter. It doesn't need This I doesn't need to be capitalized, just this first letter. You can name this anything. You can name it a real long name. You can name it one letter if you want to. And then this goofy looking format here tells the number formatter that we're going to format this in feet and inches. And I want to see fractions. And I want to see leading zeros. If you don't want to see leading zeros, you can set this to false. And again, that's all explained over here in this video. At least I'm hoping it's all explained there. So for right now, this is the really important stuff. We're creating this number formatter, and all we're doing is setting some parameters for it. We're just, after this number formatter gets created, we want to tell it how we want to format things that we send to it. And so up here in this label of this polyline, I want to format perimeter to feet and inches. And one way I can do that is as I can say, I can use this line here, fi.apply perimeter. And that's going to tell this number formatter, which is fi, to take perimeter and do the formatting for it and return it. And so you see it over here, 32 feet 6 9/16 inches. So that's the absolute simplest way to use this. What I've done is created a function, or in Ruby speak, I think you would call this a method. And I've called it F1. And that could be anything. You could call this format from something to feet and inches, or name it whatever you want. This also needs to start with a capital letter. That capital letter tells Ruby something that's important. So this needs to be a capital letter, but nothing else needs to be capitalized. It could be, but it doesn't need to be. And there's two purposes to creating this method. The first is that I can give it a short name like this. Instead of saying fi.apply and then filling in out here, I can just say F1, just like I've done up here. F1 and then give it this parameter that in this case is perimeter. Now the other thing that you can do when you define a method is you can do something like I've done here in this F3. So here it is up here, F3 perimeter. And here's what that does. I've got 32 feet and then a space and then 6 9/16. I took the dash and the blank space here and I flipped them. I sort of like that better. To me it's a little bit easier to read. So if you do a method like this, you can do things like that. So here what I'm doing is I'm calling F1. I go into this F3 method, and the first thing I do is get the formatted value, which this F1 method returns. And then I just do some text substitutions. This says substitute a dash, or substitute this hash for a dash. And that's just doing a placeholder. And then substitute this dash for a blank, and then substitute a blank for the hash. And these exclamations here say do it in line. Don't create a new variable. So anyway, you can modify what this number formatter returns when you do a method like this. This is just one example. Down here, all this green stuff is things that are commented out. This is not part of what I'm using, but this is just things I've tested. And you can get fancy with things. Like here, I've done some error checking. Because if you call this with something like an area, it's not going to work correctly. You want to call this with a linear value, like a linear perimeter. Alright, let's go back to this tutorial RB. Here's the important thing in this tutorial RB file. I've added this require format. And this is a Ruby command. And all this does is say, go find the file called format, which is this file right here. Go find this file and include all the things that are in here in place of this line. What you could do is you could take all this right here and you could just put it right up here at the top of this tutorial.rb file. It would work the exact same way. But this just remotes all this information and lets you work on this file without messing around with this. You could also require more than one file. And by adding this to this tutorial.rb file, all this stuff, all the things that are here get loaded or activated or whatever you want to call them. So you don't have to mess around with trying to initialize things. That's one of the biggest downfalls of this whole system with Ruby and Chief is there's no initialization routine. There should be. We're using this tutorial.rb file as an initialization routine because by default it gets loaded when the program starts. And I guess the caveat to all this is that if you make a change, if you have this format RB file, and again you can name this anything, it doesn't have to be named format. It just needs to match that right there. It needs to match whatever you name this file. But one issue with all this is that if you change anything, if I make a change in this format file or change something that I've put in this tutorial.rb file, I've got to shut down Chief and restart it in order for Chief to recognize the changes. So just keep that in mind. If you're making a change over here to something and you're trying to test it, you're not going to see the changes until you exit from Chief and then restart, because at that point it reads this tutorial.rb file, which in turn reads this format file. Probably the best way to understand all this is just to play with it a little bit. It all seems to work. I've not done extensive testing. This is not something I really use myself because I don't really need it. Chief is just a hobby for me. It's not something I use to make a living with. and I'm just wanting to get this set up for other people who don't know Ruby but have the ability to copy and paste things and set this up, make their life a little easier. All this eliminates the need to go into text macro management and create these individual text macros. Not entirely. I mean, you may still want to do that or need to do that, but this is just one way of getting around that. Post questions if you have any. And as I said, experiment with this if you want to and make some changes. There's tons of Ruby resources. I know everybody out there is not a programmer, but there's tons of Ruby resources on the web. And there's a good bit of information here on the forum. You just have to dig around for it, and oftentimes you have to know a little bit about what you're looking for. But hopefully this will get you started. And post questions if you have any.